Hey all, today I'm doing a watercolor of a fall landscape. Here's the image. Put it in the top right corner. And I'm just kind of laying out the basics of it. I think the dimensions of my taped off paper are a little wider than the image, but I'm just kind of adapting as I go. I'm not really trying to get it exact, just using it as a jumping off point, a reference photo. I'm not even sure where this reference photo came from. I know I didn't take it. I probably got it online somewhere. I try to get most of my reference photos, if I don't take them myself, I try to get them from, there's several websites, but pixabay.com, I think, is the site with copyright free images to use that I often use. This one I don't know where it came from. It's either from there or someone I follow on Facebook or Instagram that wouldn't mind me using it, that kind of thing. And as I'm drawing this, I'm just kind of keeping in mind the different areas of contrast in the image. So you have the background, which is that pale blue, and then the trees are just kind of grayish blue. They kind of almost blend in. Then you have the foreground shadowy trees that are the darkest, along with a few of the foreground trees on the right, just to kind of echo the left-hand trees. And then the foreground has that, bright green, pale bright green lawn of grass there. There's a little pond or some kind of water in the middle that's more white than anything, so I'm kind of trying to leave that. And the pencil drawing doesn't look like much, but it's just, like I said, kind of notes of what I'm looking at in the photo. Again, starting with the palest color, which is in the sky. And since most of these leaves are blocking out the sky, I went ahead and put the yellow and then the red and kind of rusty browns of that middle section there. Kind of adjusting the colors on the fly as everything's still wet. So in a way, it's kind of mixing the colors on the on the paper to give it more of an orange. Since these are leaves and the shapes are very jaggedy, leaf shaped, I'm trying to use this big brush on its side mostly, and doing a lot of little dabs to kind of convey the texture a bit. And this green on the left is not necessarily going to be there completely in the final painting, but it just kind of starts off that side. That's just how I'm starting it. Because again, any kind of dark colors will cover up any lighter valued colors later on. So most of my paintings in watercolor start off fairly light, like this, pale, and because it can always be darkened, it can't be lightened again very well. And that first layer basically was dry. I kind of did a quick edit there, but we're back to a dry painting and just kind of going back over with another layer here. After I added that, I realized there wasn't really a lot of yellow there where I put it, so I'm going back with just water to try to, soften that back out. Not a big deal. Like I said, I'm not following the photo exactly, but another reason to add these colors, like this yellow for instance, even in places that it's going to be covered up later, is that some of it will bleed through and it helps with the unity of the whole image at the end. You kind of want to repeat any colors you add to one area into some other areas, and it just kind of helps the whole thing go together, I find. Trying to get a lot of pigment and very little water on my brush because I'm going back over. I think that's what I'm doing in this part, just to go back over these dense foliage areas. Also trying to find the right color. Oh, I was wrong. This is for that darker rust belt area. I like those little gaps of white there. I hope that doesn't get covered back up. It might. It's often a good idea just to let something like that dry, and then you can always cover it back up later on if you don't like it, but if you do like it, it's better to preserve that. For later. Those shadow areas don't necessarily have that red in it, but it's the same idea as just keeping the colors harmonious and unified just by adding the same color everywhere. Paintbrush got stuck to the tape there. finally getting around to the darker tree trunks. Although I guess I'm starting off with the grays. Lighter gray and then darker. I've got the right hue of that gray. That's kind of a cool gray in the background. It may be slightly dark, but maybe not once you put in the rest of the shadows. And here I'm kind of approximating this tree. I'm not painting every single branch, but for the most part it becomes a kind of a solid gray value there. As the paint's drying, it's always good to decide whether the edges need to be softened or if they're good as they are, because you kind of can't soften it after if it dries. You can slightly, but by re-wetting it and scrubbing, but generally it's a good idea to consider that as you're painting. Softening edges where needed, that is. Got the angle of the shadow a little wrong, but it's not a big deal for the painting. For this section, even as I was doing it, I realized that I should have switched back to my larger brush. This just takes so much longer, and you end up doing a lot of these little dots everywhere. With the larger brush, you can do a whole edge at a time instead of little dots. But I think by the time I got into it, I was like, well, I'll just keep going. But I did have that thought as I was painting it that I should be switching back to my larger wash brush, and maybe I do in a little while, but I'm also noticing I got that far background area, the trees in the background. Have those too high in the image, I believe. But all that's covered by the fact that I'm not trying to stay exactly with the image, I guess. I'm using it for inspiration. Anytime I see the way that the tree limbs line up in the image, I can take that and use what I can in the actual painting, and whatever I don't use is fine. It kind of just becomes unimportant because it's not in the painting. Trying to add a little of that of the trees in the background, but right away I realized that's not really working. The brush is way too thick for those tiny little lines, and so I just end up kind of scrubbing it back out a bit. The limbs on the left side aren't as problematic because those are all going to be covered over with darker leaves, foliage. If you do use the smaller brush for this type of stuff, it's better to do kind of what I was doing there. Use the side of the brush a little more and kind of use kind of sweeping motions, and also turning the brush to get different angles on the brush strokes. Since all these leaves aren't conformed to one direction, you kind of need to mimic that with your brush technique. Get the right texture going. I do like the dappled lighting that's kind of peeking through here and there on the left side. And as I was painting this, I was kind of thinking, well, I'll darken it all, and then I'll come back with the white opaque gesso for the details, which worked out okay. I'll talk about that when I get to that part. One little practical tip when you're doing a painting with the taped off edges, it's always good to bring the paint all the way to the edges, and especially if you can get some darker tones at the edge, because it'll make the effect more apparent when you take the tape back off. And the corners are especially important to get some paint into. Again, I'm kind of cringing that I'm using this small brush for all this leaf work. I could get it done a lot quicker with a larger wash brush. But at the end, it's not a big deal. Whatever gets the job done is fine. I paint over this at the end, but I like the red rusty colored tree trunk on the far right. That's kind of impressionistic. Kind of wish I'd left some of that alone, but I'm pretty sure I went back with a dark value. Need to be careful not to add too much color back there. It is supposed to be very muted in the distance. Some of this stuff I'm kind of searching for what to do next. I know it's not finished, but I'm just kind of scanning around and trying to see where this, where each of these colors can go, so I don't waste it on my brush. Once I have the brush loaded with a color, I need to try to use it somewhere if possible. And here I am going back with the almost black paint, which of course again is the blue and the red mixed together mainly. I really like how that tree trunk turned out. It's really nice and bold and good shapes. And is something like the reference photo. As you can tell, the paint that I was going into is slightly damp in areas, so I'm getting a little bit of that leaching out of the dark color into the foliage. And I think after I cut in a second to a different video, I think I kind of wiped up some of that with a clean brush. So that problem will disappear pretty soon. Because it stayed wet long enough to not worry about it right away. It's funny, the longer you look at a reference photo, the more details you'll be able to pick out, especially when you're going color by color. Like once I had green on my brush, I was kind of seeing these little dappled green shadows along that ridge line, and it's something you wouldn't necessarily notice at first viewing, but the more you're focused on what your eye is seeing in the photo, the more details you pick out. There's the switch, by the way, to the next little frame once it's dried. And here I'm kind of drawing in a bit of those distant limbs, and it works fine. This is just a mechanical pencil, but it works fine on lighter areas. But when you draw onto the darker areas, like when I do the stuff on the left, it has that shine of the graphite, which is not, doesn't look very good over here on the left. But the stuff in the middle looks fine. It just looks like pencil work. I probably could have gone in with colored pencils instead, that waxier medium, and then it wouldn't have that shine, and then I could add those lines in that way as well. A bit more green to this foreground area. It was a little too pale, too white. I think I'm mostly done with this image. I might add a little more darkness to the leaves. Don't remember. Oh, here I have some opaque white, and I'm adding. The only problem with this one is that it leaves very round droplets as I'm adding it. First of all, because I had too much water on my brush, but also it's just hard to get with this brush that I'm using, it's hard to get, you know, lines rather than, because I'm really trying to make marks smaller than my brush can make, which is a problem. A lot of times it doesn't matter, but some of this, you know, if you look closely at it, it does look funny. It doesn't look like, you know, realistic. But you can always, you know, let that dry and then come back over it with a quick, you know, line here and there just to sharpen up some of those light areas, some of those whites. I think it is a good idea to add it though, because it does add something to the painting. But I guess overdoing it would be a problem because it doesn't all look very natural. I think it looks good on those background trees, for instance. In the end, I don't think I overdid it. I did a few more on this side and then called it good. And I actually did go back, although I don't think I have a photo of it. I did go back and cover over a little bit of that white gesso areas. That's pretty much it for this one. Hope you've enjoyed. Hope you got something out of it. And got the photo of it here, the finished piece. It's actually a little, got the contrast a little high on the photo, but yeah, it turned out well. And anyway, thanks for watching.